Hello everyone and welcome along to our second live stream of the 2022-23 series. Today we're talking about brand management, which I had a quick look on Wikipedia. I'm not sure how much you can rely on Wikipedia for descriptions earlier, but it was the best one I found actually. And it says it's a series of techniques used to increase the perceived value of a product or service. So today we've got Aisling Bremner here on my left and Jane Roper here with us, and we're going to do some introductions in a minute, but Aisling works as a brand strategy consultant, having held various marketing and brand management roles up until then, and Jane is currently in marketing and comms for co-ownership as well as running her own freelance gigs too. So welcome along, ladies. Thank you very much for coming along today. If we could start off then, Jane, can you take us through your top 5 favourite brands and tell us why they're there?
Okay, easy question. Okay, we're going to start with local brands. So first brand is Outside In, or as I like to call them, OI. And the reason I think that they're a really good example of brand and brand management is they live their brand values. You know, they give back to the community. It's not this, it's popular to have a social purpose. They are driven by their social purpose. I think, on their website they've said up until June of this year, they have donated 125,000 items of clothing. And that for like a small brand is amazing. So I think, at the minute what we're seeing an awful lot of the time is that companies are jumping on this social purpose. Oh, we do this, aren't we great? Whereas Outside In, for me, they just do it. It's nothing like, oh, look at us. It's just, this is what we do. So I think that they're a really good example.
The social enterprise thing's an interesting one. When I started Blue Sky, I was on the Ulster Bank programme where Dave Linton, Aisling, was on as well, from Madlug. Mm-hmm. And I remember Dave did a 60-second pitch, and theirs is around some statistic about the number of children that leave the care system end up with all their belongings in a black bag, and he's not very happy with that. So they set up Madlug, which gives a bag to people when they leave the care system, so they leave with dignity and all that stuff. And I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, whenever he did that pitch. And it's amazing to have a story like that, isn't it? And it's a lot more challenging when you're selling widgets.
Yeah. I think that the issue right now for me is storytelling has become so big in marketing that everyone feels that they need to have a story, and it sometimes feels that it's manufactured, or it's kind of going, what PR value can we get out of this? Whereas with this organisation, I just feel that, regardless if they were in, the Belfast Telegraph or Belfast Live, they would just do it, and it's been proven that when no one supported them, they were still doing it, and it, they're helping Northern Ireland. Like the homelessness issue in Northern Ireland is massive, and they're kind of going, well, you know what, we're going to do something about this. And it almost shames other organisations that go, we're proud to be from Northern Ireland, this is our community, and they're not doing it.
And you can see how it resonates with people. I mean, you only have to walk past Queen's University or the New Ulster University campus, and you see people wearing, with real pride, wearing the OI hats or carrying a Madlug bag or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think social purpose, it is on the agenda, and you're seeing it, even with climate change and that. But I think that we need to have a really innovative solution and simple solution to a problem, and that is, it's kind of give one, share one, or buy one, share one is their kind of slogan. So I think that it's really interesting, and it's just going to be interesting to see how they scale that up, and then also how other organizations kind of adopt that, so that we're not always having like fast fashion and things like that. So yeah, I think that they really do live their brand values. Next. And then my second one is Be Perfect Cosmetics. For 2 reasons actually. One, they completely get their customer. You walk into their mega stores and the music is pumping. It's a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock and you feel like you're in Ibiza in a rave. So I just think that they really have got, actually, our customer is young, this is what they want. We're kind of a party brand, and you see it then how that transfers into all of their products, even how they name their products, like Carnival, even the swatches that they have, they're bright, they're bold. And then the second
they're
one,
at the airports now as well, aren't
they? They're everywhere. Like I remember, like 5 years, no, maybe more, maybe 7 years ago, I worked for another organisation, and we went to a show over in Birmingham, and they were there with their wee stand, and they were selling the paint on the powdered eyebrows, and they're coming up and going, okay, let's do your eyebrows. But see, even then, it was a party atmosphere, and I just do think that is in their DNA, and that's what branding is all about. It's not fake; it has to be part of your DNA. And to see how Brendan and that team have completely scaled, they move nearly every year for a warehouse to get something bigger. They have how many flagship stores? They're going into the Republic. They're trying to go in. They went into Ibiza. They're trying to go into Dubai, and this is just, I think that is just.
It's a great story. I've heard Brendan came into the Ulster Bank,
right? Okay,
and told the story about the setup of that. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, but he started selling makeup accessories at a stall in the Kennedy Centre, I think, over in West Belfast, and completely bootstrapped it. Bought some stuff, sold it, used what he made to buy some more, and then just with
it's a bit of the Argento story, isn't
it? Yeah, and he's just managed to really.
He went on Dragon's Den with his tan, so that's where he got the funding for the tan, I'm going to say. But I think it shows you the scalability, and it shows you actually the issue you have when you come to scale is that you can sometimes lose some of those distinctive assets that make a brand. And he's been able to kind of go, no, actually this is our brand across the board. And then just a second way is that the diversity in his campaigns, it's not just kind of the influencers, the typical influencers that are gorgeous promoting, it's ordinary people, it's people with disabilities, it's even kind of what he's doing right now with men in makeup and saying actually it's okay for men to wear makeup, whereas 5 years ago would that have been something that makeup brands, even MAC, would have promoted? I don't know, but from a local level, I think that he's doing so much for young people and actually showing people, if you want to be an entrepreneur, this is how you can go about it. And it's not, this, what we're seeing right now is it's not this side hustle and, hustle and, you'll get the 6 figures there really quickly. It's actually, this is work, this is the determination, this is how you build the business, and it will take you.
Calculated risks.
Yeah, I just kind of think that he's a really good ambassador for his brand and for people that want to kind of go into entrepreneurship. So yeah, that's my 2 reasons for loving them. My third one is Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. So they are a government funded organisation, and they're all about recycling, which everyone knows we should do. Everyone says that they do it, but we all probably don't do it enough. And why I really like them is they took a gamble on creativity, and instead of going, you must do this, they made it funny. So a lot of their campaigns feature roadside aisle. So they invented this puppet from, he's probably a bad mouth puppet, but he's very, very funny. And you kind of go, and I always kind of think when you watch their ads, you kind of go, yeah, I know that, but yeah, I need to do that. But it's funny and in a light-hearted way, and you're just kind of like going, that is good, and it's a talking point as well. And again, then they pushed it even further with using Barry the Blender Henderson, who is very outspoken, and for me, for an organisation that is taking risks and kind of going, God, do we want to be kind of represented by this figure? But again, it got the message that we need to do more with recycling. And yes, it might be not a sexy topic, but it's a really important one that we need to take action on.
Yeah. And we want people to engage with it, and we want people to do something, so we need to stop them and do the thing that maybe people don't expect a government body to be brave enough to go and do.
Yeah, so I just really love that one. My fourth one is Ryanair. So they just do, This
one's a controversial one.
I don't think it is controversial because you get what you see with them. They don't try and be anything other than who they are. There's no fluff with them. And I think an awful lot of brands at the minute, some tend to kind of over-exaggerate who they are and, what they do. And we've seen it in the press. We've seen with greenwashing. We've seen, people kind of posting unrealistic expectations of, the outcomes that their brand or their organisation can achieve for the customer. Whereas Ryanair, they're just like, you want a cheap flight, you want to get there, we'll get you there.
Or and we'll get you close to
we'll get you close to it, and I always
your bags mightn't come.
But I actually I normally fly to London EasyJet, always have, couldn't get on a flight with them, so went with Ryanair and thought, God, this is going to be a nightmare. And maybe it's because I thought that it was going to be a nightmare that actually it was one of the best flights. Because I got on, they were there on time. The girl allowed me to bring on an extra wee bag. Thought this was great. Got there on time, and it didn't cost me, the earth. I don't know whether it was because I thought it was going to be so bad or compared it to other things, but I was just like, yeah, It's really good.
I think there's probably something in there, isn't there, about setting expectations
Yeah.
about what the service levels.
It's so low.
But then
Yeah, well,
there
no, I
is something
think there's
around
something
that.
in it.
There's a science around the kind of expectation gap and kind of what you expect versus what you get. And I think you can't expect any lower from Ryanair.
Yeah.
So maybe as long as they can go over that bar,
As long as they can get you in the
So
air.
I think they're very true to who they
And they're actually very good
they're
on
unashamed.
Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, they're actually quite funny on Twitter. I mean, you shouldn't have Michael O'Leary anywhere near Twitter, but but their Twitter account is actually quite funny, and they are quite self-deprecating, and they sort of know what people think of them, and they embrace it.
And lean
And I
into
think
it,
that
yeah.
works. Yeah.
And see, to be fair, like during COVID, the customer service, like I know that customer service was slated with them, but actually I got my refund really quickly from them, and the process actually to get the refund was really straightforward. I was a wee bit surprised, kind of going, this really should be harder, than it is, just because you hear they're a nightmare to deal with, their customer service isn't great, and it was just like, go enter this code, it'll take, it might have took like 4 weeks, 5 weeks to get it, but they did manage that expectation, and I think that that's where an awful lot of companies fall short. Sometimes they try and kind of go, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then when they slip up, then you're like, well, you're not delivering, or it's unrealistic sometimes. And
Number
then my
5.
last one is Lidl. So I love Lidl because I love what they've done with brand quality is cheaper. So in marketing, we talk about, you have to have distinctive assets. You have to set yourself aside from your competition, which is all true. But when you go into Lidl's, they have understood the importance of familiarity with their brand. So what they've done, and I use the shampoo example, is I like the Aussie hair conditioner, which is about £4 or £5. Comes in a lovely kind of container. It's got peaches and purple colouring, but cost of living crisis, and you're like, oh well, I'll kind of leave that out of the basket. I might not kind of get that this month. And you go into Lidl, and they do a replica one, so same type of bottle, same colours, same fonts, and it's £2. And you literally go, yep, okay. And I think that there's a importance that your brand has to be familiar, so it has to have that mental availability. People have to recognize it, and they have kind of got, well, we've got people in here because they want brands, but they want it cheaper, so actually let's imitate their most famous brands that people love. And you see it then in other products that they do, like their deluxe range really kind of reflects a lot of M&S food in terms of packaging and kind of how it's even described, like sourdoughs and things like that. And that's kind of what people want, and I think that they've recognized that, and they're kind of going, we're not ashamed in it, and it actually works for our business model. And I think that that's where the success is. It's not being a copycat for the sake of being a copycat. It's being a copycat in the nicest way because it works for their brand and their brand values and what their customers want.
Okay.
So I think that's it.
Okay,
That's my
What
last
about you,
one.
Aisling?
I don't think I've actually got a local one in here, but shame on me. But I'm going to start with, there's so many. I am like a big brand geek, so I can probably talk about this all day. The first one I have is Airbnb. And the reason being, I just think what they did with creating a new category, they basically applied blue ocean kind of strategy thinking, and have kind of taken what could have been a very transactional process in terms of a room in a house, or indeed then when it has expanded accommodation, but they built this amazing community. They built this kind of these layers of connection, and their brand essence is all about belong anywhere. So they took kind of, as I say, that transactional element and built such kind of rich meaning and content. And if you go onto their site, that they understand you, and they have just made that whole kind of process of going into an area so much more meaningful, and the value that they have then brought to being able to rent a house. It's not a cheap option anymore, so I think they have transcended just the categories.
An interesting part of that for me as well is the whole customer experience bit.
Totally.
Because before we actually had an American holiday booked that we were supposed to go in 2020 before the COVID pandemic, and we'd booked our accommodation in the States through 2 Airbnb apartments. And our initial perception, rightly or wrongly, whenever pandemic hit and we realised we weren't going to be able to go on the holiday, was this is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. Airbnb were like, no problem, don't
Yeah.
worry, refunds immediately issued. So for me, that was really, really clever that they realised the potential brand damage
Yeah.
of not responding appropriately to what had happened, and that people were now forced to change plans at a
Yeah.
very late stage through no fault of their own. So they took the hit, and I'm sure it was a hit.
Yeah.
Well, they took and they pivoted their entire business model to kind of, I suppose, adapt.
Yeah,
to that.
and we'll come on. I know we're going to talk later
Yeah.
about that whole the role of brand management and looking across the whole customer journey and realizing that. But for me, that was a real example of they really understood what was important to their users and
Yeah.
their customers, and were taking a longer term view of
Yeah.
how do we come out of this
Keep them
stronger
with
than
us.
we went into
Yeah.
it.
But I think it shows. Oh, good.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think that there was a genuine gap that they spotted, that was that some people are looking for a more meaningful holiday,
Yeah.
a more real holiday, and they completely leaned into that. And ensured that if you're going into a neighbourhood, you knew the restaurants, you knew the people, you knew the places to hang out. So the value that they added beyond ultimately what they were getting paid for was where they built this massively valuable community, and brand. So for me, that's why they are just exceptional, like at that kind of community side of things.
Okay.
Next, I have Dollar Shave Club. And Dollar Shave Club is like a case study, obviously, in terms of disruptive brands, and why I love what they've done. And I just think, again, that's probably another category that has been disrupted by a new brand. But I think what they did there was they really understood the customer pain points.
Yeah.
Nearly before
Roger Federer and the tennis.
but really understand it nearly before the customer did.
Yeah.
That actually, I'm only being given this one choice, which is this cheap plastic razor that's still costing me £20 or £15 a go. Plus, I often run out.
Yeah.
And yet, so they created.
And men hate going anywhere near shops.
And men hate
so
going-
give me a solution
Yeah.
that means I don't. I'm a Harry's customer, and the only
Right.
reason I'm a Harry's customer is because when I first saw the Dollar Shave Club at a marketing event, obviously, I thought that is amazing. My first instinct was I'm signing up, and it wasn't available in the UK at the time. But it started this whole move towards these
it did.
DTC sort of.
But it was. I think the insight that, as you say, men don't want to have to run in and get this because they're not natural shoppers.
I'm
so
stockpiling blades at home, by the way, because we
You
have.
can sell them.
Honestly, because you set the frequency of order. So I'm actually ordering more blades than I ever
Than
did.
you actually-
Bought it on the premise that it would save me money.
So
You order.
there's like an amazing subscription
it's
model.
brilliant because they've got the subscription model that
Yeah.
it says every 3 months deliver me this number of blades or whatever. And obviously I started shaving less once COVID happened because you weren't
Yeah.
leaving the house as much. But you don't change the frequency.
No.
So
And
so the
that's-
bathroom cabinets now just full
Yeah.
of like these.
But you're also probably unlikely to change suppliers. So once you're in, you're in.
They
And I
just
think
trust the brand loyalty. They've got it now. yeah.
so for me, the other element of that was the creativity of the kind of their first, viral video. And obviously it was created by an ad man. So, a lot of people won't know that it was an advertising guy that set up the company. But he got the fact of doing something the complete opposite than the Gillettes and the polished. And so I just think for
Superstars.
somebody, a startup coming through, just thinking about, okay, well, if the whole category is going this way, how can I go that way?
Yeah.
And I just think, yes, they've become a multi-billion-dollar company, and Unilever ended up buying them, but they started out being this really kind of bootstrap challenger brand, so I just love the kind of fact that they understood the customer kind of need before the customer did, and that kind of creativity side of things. Another brand that you mentioned earlier is Innocent, and the reason I liked Innocent back in the day, probably the reason is that each one of these examples I've learned something and applied it in a company I've worked in. For Innocent, it was very much they were the creators of the idea of packvertising, and so that is using that really expensive asset that sits on kind of, on the product and on the shelves that everybody's interacting with every day. And really before Innocent, people weren't really using that pack to kind of tell a story.
Yeah, it was probably only Coca-Cola with their packaging, with their bottle design.
Yeah, the bottle design was iconic, but they weren't telling a story. Nobody before Innocent was really telling a full story on pack, and really they kind of coined the whole tone of voice, brand personality thing, So for me, everybody kind of stood up and went, wow, actually these guys are in a category that beforehand was very hidden. It was like you couldn't see into the bottle. God knows what was in the bottle, so their transparency, the authenticity, they just owned that, and actually in doing so just showed everybody else up, and then they took you on a wee journey, through the pack and told you all about the company. And it's amazing how much people were actually probably setting that in front of them and spinning it around and reading, and kind of many moons later when I was working in Dale Farm, we definitely took inspiration from that to kind of, what's the way, if your milk is on your table every single day, how can we tell our story, So I think as the kind of founding fathers of pack advertising, I really appreciate that brand. Now
this
is
the second webinar in a row. Actually, we're both Dollar Shave Club and Innocent.
Oh, really?
I've got to mention,
cliche.
No, it's not. It's, and it's just because it is, and for different reasons actually.
Right,
But I know what it is. It seems right.
But since now they have been bought by Coca-Cola, and there's definitely the edge and the freshness literally has gone off them. The essence of the brand is there, but they haven't continued to surprise and delight the way they once did.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunately the kind of when you're bought
what
by a big
happens.
company. My final two, I couldn't not mention Heinz. So the reason being,
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Yeah. So I that was my very first job working for Heinz, and the reason I'm bringing it up is that it's a masterclass in brand management in terms of the principles, the depth of research, the full 360 in terms of kind of classic brands. And if you look at a brand that is that old and remains as relevant today, so what they have done is they've never got complacent. They have continued to, subtly refresh. They've continued to engage in culture and what matters to people. And so from that point of view, I think in terms of a brand for the long term, they're kind of a masterclass in that perspective. And I think people, when they're building a brand, should think about that rather than tactical. And we'll probably talk more about tactical versus brand building. Heinz will always do their tactical. They'll do their deals and all the rest, but they've never lost sight of building a brand. And I think whether you're a small business or a really large business, that is something that you shouldn't lose sight of if you want value, So I think Heinz from that perspective, and I suppose I had the privilege of sitting in so many research groups with consumers of Heinz, and the love for that brand is unbelievable, And I've sat in interviews before where people just start to do the jingle. They just start to, they're like, and then they do beans, meat, and the way they go, and it's just there. So at the minute you kind of
But that was a golden
surface,
age, though. I mean, I know we're talking advertising now, but I mean that was a golden age. You had Heinz, you had the Mars a Day helping you work, rest, and play. You had the finger fudge.
There's something about that, but
you had all that was just the gold. I mean, I was over in Manchester last week speaking to Nick Entwistle and Dan Kelsel for future episodes of this, and they both referred independently of each other to that golden age of advertising in the 80s, where it was just better than it is now, I think.
But it's more creative.
More creative, and they were embedding in your kind of psyche these little reminders of the brand, and if you think about, I think everybody's trying to replicate that today, and something like Sonic branding is a good example of something that I'm kind of saying, how can you bring that into your brand, because it's, whether it's the Netflix sound or the kind of Audi, those are great ways of kind of building memory for a brand. But I think something like Beans means Heinz, but things like their Keystone, again, just those iconic elements of a brand that have been refined but not changed. So there's a real trust, and I think in terms of through the generations that comes with that, yet they don't look old. They look.
They've never changed their logo, have they?
Oh, they have. Again, the base logos are refined every year. They're tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked, but so much so then that you don't ever look like they've done a big change.
See, I think that's the issue with rebrands, is that everyone wants a rebrand, but actually a rebrand is a nightmare, because you're kind of starting sometimes from scratch. Again, you're kind of going, okay, we have to get new logos, new colours, new associations.
There've been numerous disasters of that. I mean, I can't remember what it was that the post office tried to change their name to a number of years ago, but it was just a mess.
What would you call the post office if it wasn't the post office?
I don't know. I can't even remember. It was so bad that I can't even remember it. I just remember they abandoned the idea pretty quickly after the new thing was put forward, and it was like, no, this is they missed the.
They didn't read the room in terms of their
who are we?
what
What do
their
our
consumers
customers
want.
think? What do our customers value in what we do?
So that's Heinz, and my final is Patagonia, and we talked about kind of purpose-driven brands, and I've done quite a lot of work around purpose-driven brands, and sometimes really advising people to stay away from it, in terms of you need to go all in. You need to be coming from a very genuine, truthful place. It isn't a PR stunt, and you'll get found out. But I think Patagonia are, again, just a masterclass in a company that has been kind of built from the ground up organically, with that at its core. It was created in the 1970s, and it just gets its audience. It gets its people that they care about more than, the brand, so in terms, and they live it, again, from a purpose-driven brand. They live it through every part of their company, from the supply chain, to the kind of the kind of work that they do, the things that they give back on. And I think obviously most recently it's been in the news because of, the owner kind of gifting it to the planet, basically gifting the whole company. I can't remember what it's worth. It's
3 billion or something.
I think it's like 30 billion or something.
Yeah.
It's massive. Yeah. But now the only shareholder is the planet. So we don't all have to go as far as that. But I think they're a lesson in, they're a massively profitable company. So you don't, in being purposeful and giving back and business for good, you can do that alongside building a very profitable business. You don't need to be
it's not one or the other.
No, and you don't need to be a social enterprise to be purpose driven. You can make a profit for your shareholders and also give back. So and also their clothes are great. I love their clothes. They're very kind of relevant, and they're brilliant quality. But I also feel good wearing them. And it's very much not a marketing tactic.
But I think some of the issue, like the word profit, profit sometimes is a little dirty for people, that you don't want to say, oh, we want to make a profit. Making money is what you're in business for. And I think that's you have to kind of be comfortable to talk about money and be like, actually, yes, we are here to make a profit, but we can have a purpose. Where I think that people try and hide that and kind of go, actually, no, let's not talk about that word. That's a dirty word. That, our customers don't want to know that. Well, actually, your customers want to know that you're profitable, because they kind of want to invest in you. They want to be there with
and
you.
They want you
to be there next year.
Yeah, and you can sustain jobs and sustain,
So I kind of think that we have to kind of get that idea that profit isn't a dirty word, that, we have to promote kind of our successes in that way, and that is a key factor of success.
It's like all of the B Corp businesses. So the kind of the triangle there is people, planet, and profit. So we absolutely cannot support people and planet if we don't have profit. So it's an absolutely vital part of that triangle. And I just think the more, and actually in Ireland we're a bit behind the curve in terms of moving towards B Corp accreditation. And I do think that is the future. So it's very interesting.
Okay, right, Jane, could you then give us a little bit of introduction? You're currently marketing and comms with co-ownership, so can you, it might be a bit of a surprise to people that we're here talking brand management with co-ownership, so can you tell us a little bit about what your role with co-ownership involves and why brand management is such an important part of it?
Okay, I'll bring you back, actually, I won't talk about kind of my current day roles, I'll bring you back to a couple of years ago to set the scene. So co-ownership have been around for 30-something years, 1978. We have a customer base of 10,000 and we've helped over 30,000 people. So, that's quite successful for a Northern Ireland company. But what had happened was that we got a bad reputation. We were told that we were slow. We were told that, people didn't understand our processes, that we were hard to deal with. So about 5 years ago, we restructured the business and we rebranded, and we took that decision to actually walk away from what we were kind of, all the bad things that we were known for, and try and put things right. So we really kind of hunkered down for brand management about 5 years ago and went, actually, this is what we're going to do. And what we did was we spoke to our customers and we found out what they didn't like about us or what their misconceptions were. And we started then to create our brand messages and our brand strategy around it. And one of the surprising things, what we found out, was people didn't like the word co-ownership housing. So that was our name, co-ownership housing. And people were like, no, I'm not housed. I'm not cattle. I'm a homeowner. So that for us was a real turning point, because it actually it meant that we needed to relook at how we talk to people. So prior to that, we would have talked to people in a very formal tone of voice, possibly sometimes hierarchical, I can say that word, and a very legal, because you're buying a house. It's a big deal. You need to know the legal ramifications.
You're using an awful lot of big words here.
I know, and I can't pronounce half of them as well. So I'm kind of going, is that how you pronounce it? So if I look a bit confused, that's what I'm thinking. So we went basically on that journey, and we then decided we would do brand campaigns, and we would teach people what we were all about. So we don't really do kind of activation style, because we have a natural demand. But it's about understanding and raising that awareness. So my kind of day-to-day job, and what's so important about it, is that we have to maintain that understanding, because buying a house is a long process. It's not just, I'll nip down to the shop and buy a house and this is who I'm going to go with. It takes, a couple of months, maybe even a couple of years. I know that you had a podcast with, who was it? It was the one with Andy Jarvis and Gareth, and they did research that said that buying a house can take around 7 years from the initial thought to when you complete on it, because the decision process is so long. So we kind of looked at all of that, and we were like, okay, well, we need to kind of build future demand. So we need to be talking to those people that in a couple of years are going to be our customers. They need to learn about us. They need to trust us. And then how do we show that? So we're very transparent in all of our numbers. You can go and we talk about our figures all of the time. We talk about, how you go and do X, Y, and Z. We talk about the, with equity sharing, there is a profit, but as a not-for-profit, we give the money back. So that's why brand management is so important, because we're not thinking about the people that are applying now. We're thinking about the people that are going to be applying in a couple of years, and that we're going to become their housing partner of choice, because housing it's not given enough support in Northern Ireland, and that's a whole other issue. But there's so many social benefits as well of having your own house, and we've done research on that. So that's why brand's really important, because we can help you. We can help you become a homeowner. We can enable you. So again,
is not to suggest that it's an easy job, but is it made is the focus on brand management made a bit simpler by the fact that you actually don't need or can't do any of the sales activation stuff anyway, because it's not going to add any value, so you can just devote 100% of your attention to the brand management, and you haven't got the push and pull thing going on that can happen in companies sometimes of
sometimes we do small activation campaigns. So we do like an always on, and that's basically people who are in market, we're going to remind you that we're there. So we're going to build that mental availability, because we know that if you see something once, you're going to forget it. You need to see it, I don't know how many ever times that they've now come up with that number. So we do activation in that bit, but at the same time, and this goes back to our social purpose, if you're not a good fit for ownership, i.e. if you can do it by yourself, we will decline you. We will say no, actually, because we have limited funds, we're a charity, we need to help the people that really need our help. So we don't want you applying if you can do it by yourself. And we're very honest about that. And then we don't want a high decline rate as well. So we kind of have to, manage that. And we have to manage the understanding of, okay, you're buying a house with another company. Okay, what does that entail? How does that work? How do you buy out? Are you trapped? Is it that you're going to become a landlord? So the brand management piece, we have to dispel an awful lot of myths, because you have, like at the minute we have housing's too unaffordable for people, stay in the rental sector. Well, actually that creates an issue, because it drives rents up. Home ownership is actually affordable. We've done the calculations and work out that it's around £200 a month cheaper than a full mortgage. We help you overcome barriers, and you're constantly going against that emotional attachment and that emotional fear. So, sometimes, buying a house is an irrational decision. You're going to take on 100 and something, £1,000 worth of debt. That's a big commitment. And you're kind of going, okay, can I afford it? Can I do this? Can I do that? And then you bring in another party, and it's kind of going, what the hell is going on? So sometimes it is a little bit harder, because you have so many messages to get right that you have to kind of go, okay, which ones are we going to prioritize in our cycle?
Okay, Aisling, so you're working as brand strategy consultant now, having had various brand management and marketing roles. So, I mean, Heinz, CNC, Queen's University, Keylite, Dale Farm are some that I found while stalking your LinkedIn profile. What's at the foundation of brand management that makes it so transferable and across all those organisations?
I I think, ultimately it wouldn't matter what sector I went into or what company I went into. Broadly speaking, the process is the same, and you need to learn the sector and the product and all of that. But like ultimately, you have to understand your customer, whether that's a B2B customer or a B2C customer, and what their pain points are, and then it's really understanding the product, and is it meeting the needs of the customer, or what developments do you need to do, or what do you need to create, and then understanding how best to find those customers, what channel. So it's real principles of marketing stuff, So for me, I actually love the fact that I have worked across, and I think you're a far better strategic, brand manager, for want of a better term, if you've worked across sectors, because you can bring so many perspectives, So I started my career in FMCG, but then moved into education, and then into manufacturing, and back into food, and have worked with many kind of smaller businesses as well. And each one of those pieces of experience I've brought something back to that next sector. So sometimes B2B really needed the creativity and the fast pace and the the kind of data driven approach that you would get in FMCG. So I actually think sometimes considering bringing people in with kind of wider experience can really help a business, just to bring kind of fresh ideas and perspective, but ultimately for me, the kind of, as long as you keep it strategic, the process of brand management is the same.
Yeah, it's one of those things you see in job ads quite a lot, isn't it? That you'll see must have 5 years FMCG experience, or 5 years B2B, 5 years engineering experience, whatever it might be. And I can't help thinking, probably because it's excluded me from applying some jobs that I would have quite liked sometimes, that it is missing a trick when you're doing that, because you're not seeing, if you keep
nothing changes.
If you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always got.
And there's a bit of a snobbiness about kind of probably the FMCG sector, that it's got a lot of the sexier kind of brands and big budgets, and they think that they've got the best of the best within that. But there's probably some great disciplines that you get in B2B, like really brilliant at lead generation, at thought leadership, that actually would transfer really great to FMCG. So I do think companies should think differently and think kind of more diversely, even if you think it's the same principle of a board. If a board was all kind of white middle-aged men,
which most of them still are,
unfortunately still, that's why I'm saying that, but the point of that is that how could they possibly have a real perspective on their consumer and their customer base? And I just think, likewise, if your brand teams have only got one-dimensional experience, so I just think whether you're a brand kind of a person starting off, get kind of wide experience, and it means then that when you if you decide to become a consultant later in life, and I sound like I'm literally dying later in life, so later in life,
in the autumn of
that's depressing me now thinking about that, but that you've got such a breadth of experience, that you can kind of work with multiple companies across different sectors, so that has stood me in good stead.
I mean, it's one of the questions, Josie, and is it just a case of people advertising for a job, put whatever job title best suits them at the time, or because you see, what's the difference between a marketing manager and a brand manager?
There is, it depends. It depends. Literally, sometimes people like the sound brand manager, and literally that's the reason why they put it. Generally, I have been both. I started my career as an assistant brand manager in Heinz, but you have to remember that marketing team was 60 people. So therefore, you would have had a brand team looking after a portfolio within the brands. So that makes real sense. So as a brand manager in that respect, when you're working at a headquarters based in London, you would have individual brand teams, and they were custodians and kind of the full accountability, full P&L responsibility for that brand, but that brand might have been one of 20. Okay, so that makes total sense, right? And that they kind of, no matter what they are, the person that makes the decisions and sign things off. When you look at somewhere like Northern Ireland that is smaller and there's smaller marketing teams, you'll tend to find that it's a marketing manager who's a bit of a catch-all. Okay, so a catch-all in terms of they might only have one brand, so therefore, so therefore they're just they oversee everything, and it's one brand. So you tend to find brand manager is there when there's a house of brands, and like for example in Dale Farm we had brand managers, because we did actually have a house of brands. It's
interesting you say that, because the one marketing team I've worked on where we had a brand manager was when I was with CDE, and we only brought the role into the team after we set up a second division. So we were working in the construction equipment industry largely in quarries and mines. And then there was an environmental division set up after the financial crash in 08, 09-ish. And it was an entirely different focus with an entirely different customer group.
Yeah.
An entirely different messaging needed. And whenever we were looking at what we needed to do going forward, then it was like, okay, we need someone who is just owning the fact that these are two very different groups of people that we're trying to target, and how we make sure that this thing still works.
Yeah.
And that's similar to the product branding approach, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very purist, you know. So when I worked in CNC, I would have been head of marketing, but I would have had a number of brand managers that reported into me. But then I also would have had kind of multi-brand specialists. So it might have been a category insight manager, you know, a customer marketing manager, and that, you know, that means that that person has got, you know, completely purist focus on that brand. But also, you know, my experience of brand management is that then you have P&L responsibility. And that is not often the case, you know, certainly in smaller businesses, you know, where, you know, the brand and marketing team is perceived as colour and in department, and it's my absolute pet hate. And most people that have kind of worked with me know that, is that, you know, a brand manager is a very commercial marketeer. You know, they know their numbers.
Yes, this moves me on to the next question, because a lot of the time whenever you mention brand management to people, people can think, oh, here come the brand police, you know, and they're just going to make you're not obeying the rules and the logos and putting together 78-page documents and brand guidelines, and all, which are all very honourable and are required, but the brand management responsibility goes way beyond that.
Oh, way beyond that. In my experience as a brand manager, I have had absolute P&L responsibility. You know, so the bottom line number and the top line number are on my KPIs. So therefore, I'm involved in or I was involved in every conversation, whether it be to do with pricing, setting the pricing strategy, whether it to do with product innovation and your work, you know, so you know every element.
Because you're bringing the insights back from the customer on one hand, and working with the internal R&D on the other.
It's an A to Z role, so I always looked at it, and it was just how I viewed my roles. I looked at it, I was running my little mini business within a business, you know, but I think that's really good kind of training for somebody if they want to go on to something else, is that you're fully involved from A to Z. So kind of as a contrast to somebody, say, working in a role like a digital marketing role, where they only get to look at one element of the whole piece, so they're not seeing the full picture, you know, and all the moving parts that make up a very dynamic brand and ecosystem. So I think that's one of the benefits of a brand management role, is that no matter what question, if they go to you and you're the person that the buck stops with, you're going to have an answer, or you're going to see, you know, you're going to know all of the detail.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to you then, Jane, can you tell us some of the brand management activity that you would be doing day to day in the role with co-ownership? Yeah.
So I spend a lot of my time in surveys and spreadsheets and data. You know, I actually don't do that much kind of creativeness. And what we kind of do day to day is we're always looking for indicators of where there's an issue with our branding. So first of all, it's web stats, because they are the early signs that something's not right. You know, if you have a drop in traffic, or you have a drop in how people are navigating through the site and how they're coming up with that decision. So we kind of look at that as well. And then we look again at surveys. So we survey at several points of the customer journey to figure out if there's breaks, what people like, and how we can make it better. Because again, that's a feeling that people are getting about your brand. It's an experience. And then we look at it from kind of a campaign sort of point of view. So we take all of our learnings, we take all of that customer feedback, all of that insight, and we work then with our media partner to go, okay, what do we need to do? So our always on advertising, even though it's performance, there's a relationship with the brand. Do we need to change some of our brand messaging? So for example, right now we're talking about cost of living crisis as part of our brand strategy to help people into homeownership, because that's a message. And then it's planning the bigger campaigns. So it's planning the TV campaigns, and then it's looking at, okay, well, what do we want to do? We want to reach these audiences. We want to say that this is what we need to do. This is how much, but again, what you're going back to and saying, okay, well, what are the numbers? So actually, this is where our budget is. This is where we're got a lot of demand in buying a house, because it actually is quite seasonal. Then you kind of work backwards and you plan all of those campaigns out. So that's kind of where I sit on a day-to-day brand. And then obviously, again, internal comms, because I think that, you know, that forms part of your brand strategy, because your teams have to be right. Your teams have to understand what is going on with that brand story, because an awful lot of the time they go, oh, marketing are doing that, don't know what's going on. Whereas we have to bring an awful lot of our teams along in the journey. So we have to talk to customer services, we have to talk to finance, so that they understand actually, okay, what's going on with all of these suppliers that are coming in, or why are you doing X, Y, and Z? And then, you know, it's kind of then going, okay, well, if we have a happy team and we have, you know, things, if inside the house is in order, then actually outside as well can be in order. So that's kind of from a brand point of view.
Going on to the Dale Farm example then, with you, Aisling, there won't be many in Northern Ireland particularly who won't be familiar with. You know, and I think I can still see that old Dale Farm logo is just imprinted.
It's not too old. It's only a couple of years it's gone.
Forever, you know. And I mean, it largely has a reasonably positive perception, largely because of its association with ice cream.
Yeah.
But can you talk us through some of the challenges or the processes that you had to go through in a project like that, with a very well established, shall we say, brand identity that was then looking to transition to make it more up to date and more modern?
So I joined the business and rebrands were not on the cards at that stage. But I suppose the challenge that I could see is that we weren't attracting, again, we did quite a lot of research, and we weren't attracting younger consumers into the brand. So we basically had missed a generation, you know. So apart from, you know, younger consumers saying, oh, that's my granny would have that in her freezer, that ice cream, you know. So literally we had missed a generation. And, you know, ultimately we had to, and the brand had not been changed in 50 years. So, you know, that's, we talk about, you know, kind of real classic brands tinkering all the time, so that there's never that big massive change. But, you know, it's a cooperative, okay, so it's owned by 1,300 farmers. So there was a duty of care there to have a sustainable business model long term. So I spent a lot of time talking to the cooperative farmer members to understand, you know, what their focus was, and if we were considering changing, how would they feel about that. And you know, what they said was they just wanted to be able to pass their farms on to the next generation. So that sustainable business model was so vital. And I suppose one of the other things the research told us was that nobody knew it was cooperative. Nobody knew.
No, I didn't until you said it there now.
No, nobody knew. Well, if you don't know at this stage, maybe some of the rebrand stuff hasn't come through loud and clear, but nobody knew that, and that was a very compelling story. So this was not a kind of a normal commercial business. This was every single penny went back into the farmers. So I had to put together a very strong case, as you can imagine.
That's a really strong
message, you know. So I had to put together a business case to the Dale Farm board, which was predominantly made up of farmers who represent each of the regions in Northern Ireland, to kind of convey why I thought they should kind of refresh the brand and really focus on building that brand and really recruiting that younger consumer.
Did you use the word refresh deliberately so it didn't scare them too much?
Yeah, no matter what you were going to do, right? And believe me, every word was chosen carefully, you can imagine. But to be honest, they were unbelievably supportive. I came with a lot of data, a lot of numbers. I had a 3-year strategy. I told them where it was going to go. If they bought into the overall strategy, they backed it 100%, and there was a goodness in everything that we were doing. We were trying to make sure that we could raise the value of the brand, and therefore raise the value of their profits, and kind of the money coming back into those families. Once we got the sign off, it was no mean feat, kind of rebranding that entire business, because actually there's a lot of touch points throughout it. But really that was the message that came through, in terms of we wanted people to see. And if you look at any of the products now, you'll see very clearly that it's, in a very simple message, 100% owned by local farmers. That was the message that we wanted to get out, and that was the message that we wanted to track. But ultimately, we knew that the Dale Farm brand, there was so much latent love for it, a bit like Heinz. And when I talked about it, it's that same level of love for that brand, kind of memories. So we had to make sure that anything that we didn't turn off the current consumers, but was able to attract new consumers. And the goal was ultimately to make sure that we could steady the current business, but also have a brand that was fit for innovation. So if you wanted to go into things that were of more appeal in the dairy category to a younger consumer, you needed a brand that could carry that, and the new one does.
Particularly, I keep talking about ice cream, but there's been so much innovation in that ice cream category over the last 30 years. You know, from I remember the original Haagen-Dazs adverts where people were like, "You can't do that," you know. Through to Ben and Jerry's, and now almost every ice cream brand that launches has that sort of fun, innocent smoothies, packvertising thing sort of going on with it. It's sort of an entry level expectation now for anybody developing something in that sector.
And it's funny how that kind of, you know, if you kind of look at that portfolio management piece, like 90% of all ice cream sold is the traditionals, the classics, you know, so all of the innovation is actually to grab people's attention, to bring them to the category. But actually everybody are it's like the chocolate category. Everybody's creatures of habits. They go to their old favorites, their galaxies. Ice cream category is exactly the same, because I was like, loved the innovation side of my job, so I was responsible for that as well. So you can imagine the fun we had with kind of innovation around the ice cream category. But the reality was, and the guys that have been there for 20, 30 years were right. People tried it once, tried it twice, and then they went back to their favourites.
It's really interesting. We did a bit of work for Morelli's a number of years ago, and I remember talking to Daniela about it, and I was surprised whenever I got the answer to the question. I said, "What's the most popular flavour?" And she's just double cream vanilla.
Double cream
always.
vanilla, all day long.
Like, you know, we do the Parma Violet stuff, and we do the unicorn stuff, and we do because it's interesting and it grabs people's attention, but. You know, in terms of the thing that wins awards, the thing that sells more than anything else, it's the staple.
It's the core, so it's the 80-20. So the 20 gives you a bit of buzz and things to talk about, and that people want, you know, particularly your customers, the actual retailers, they want something new every year. So so there's the strategy around that is really just invest to kind of keep everybody engaged and excited in something new. But obviously you'll know that maybe there's a 3-year cycle to the new stuff, but everybody goes back to Dale Farm vanilla and, you know, and honeycomb and what they love and what they know.
And
so
hopefully it's not only in their granny's freezer anymore.
No, exactly, yeah.
If we move the conversation on then, I mean, there won't be many marketers around at the minute who haven't heard some conversation about the Binet and Field assertion that, you know, your marketing budget should be split 60% brand, 40% sales activation. And there are obviously variations in that depending on the product that you're selling and the category you're in and et cetera, et cetera. But I suppose the challenge internally sometimes from a marketing perspective can be, but how do we measure the brand stuff? So can we start with you, Jane? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the key metrics that co-ownership use to assess sort of ongoing brand performance and just take the temperature of how it's developing?
Yeah, so we, obviously from what I've said, is we are very invested in brand. And metrics, they have to align with what you're doing. You know, there's a whole array of metrics that you could use. They can make you sound good. They can be like, oh yeah, I'll put that because the finance director will like that. But it kind of is, you have to choose the ones that align with your brand. So for example, we don't use share of voice really or share of search because we don't have a direct competitor, so there's no point. What we use is omnibus tracking, so for awareness levels. So before we started our rebrand, we benchmarked that. So every year we now see, okay, where are we at? And a lot of the time with brand metrics, it's not about the big jumps. It's about maintaining it or going up 1 or 2. Because when you get, you know, when you've kind of reached your peak as such, getting that kind of 3 extra points on an omnibus is actually really good. And sometimes even just standing still is really good, especially in the current climate. So we'll use awareness levels, both spontaneous and unprompted. And then we'll use understanding. So we do 5 brand statements, which our marketing centres around, and we will look at agreeance levels. So we'll look at that across the whole category, and then we'll also do it between different age groups. And what that helps us do is that helps us figure out, okay, future demand, and then what do we need to bring forward in the activation as well, because brand and activation sometimes have to go hand in hand. I don't think that we can really separate, brands over there and activations over there. We have to kind of bring it along. So those are kind of our 2. We look at net promoter score. So I
think that's something not enough people do.
Net promoter score. We do it in every single survey. Now,
I think it's a really good barometer. Just after a purchase is made or whatever, you know, what was that? And we'll talk about customer experience later and how important the finish is. But you know, it's so easy.
Yeah.
Just as
well,
a barometer.
SurveyMonkey do it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not,
Yeah.
you know, I think that the
I
issue
was
is
going to
like,
say you could do it fairly cost effectively.
Oh,
literally
yeah.
SurveyMonkey have a question at the very end, put the net promoter score in. Okay, do that. So we do use that now. There are issues with net promoter score of, you know, is it weighed correctly and things like that. So I always think that you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But it is good in terms of, you know, our board like it to see actually, okay, are we up there? Are we kind of going on par? Could we be doing more?
Yeah.
So again, then for products and process evaluations, we use it. Trust score, again, for Trustpilot, just to see.
Trust's a big thing for an organisation like yours, particularly, I would imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, because again, you know, this whole idea of trust and the whole power of reviews, I think, is so strong because everyone knows organisations are trying to sell you something. So you'll understand the advertising, you'll like it, but you'll only trust it maybe to a certain point. And then I always use the kind of the example of if I'm going to buy, say, a new foundation, I'll see the advertising, I'll like the advertising, I'll read about it in the magazines, and I'm like, yes, that's fine. But then I'll go to Boots' website and I'll look at the reviews and I'll try to find the people in those reviews that share the same issues as me, because I know that L'Oreal is trying to sell me something, so they're not going to tell me the bad bits. So I'm trying to find that person that is unbiased to a certain level. So that's kind of why we use Trust Score for that as well.
Okay.
And then again, we look at the early indicators of measuring brand. So we look at things like web stats, because web stats help us see about, are we relevant in the market? Is there an issue around, you know, is there an issue with demand? Are we going to possibly see, you know, if we get, when COVID happened, we had to close, and then when we reopened, our website just went crazy with users, and that was an early indicator for us that actually applications were going to happen, that this was going to happen. So again, it helped us kind of manage our brand and manage those internal teams to go, actually, we have a wave of customers coming, we actually need resources, because again, your brand isn't just about promotion, it's the DNA of your organization and everything that goes into it. So we start to use those as well, and then it's just about benchmarking, seeing where you're at, being realistic with the performance of where you can go. So, you know, if we're measuring brand awareness and we're at 80, well, that's actually probably a really good place where we're at, given resource and allocation, just the market. Actually, going to 83 is probably really good for us, and you know, it's kind of not going to 90. And it's about managing those expectations, especially around brand, because I think some people go, oh, that's just fluff, you know, because it's sometimes it's not money in the bank, and they're like, no.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you mentioned that the sort of full P&L responsibility within the brand management, and I think one thing that as marketers we are, we can be, and historically and still are pretty bad at sometimes, is talking about the metrics that we care about, but nobody else in the organisation really does. What were the sort of key metrics that for you from a brand management perspective then, whenever you were doing that internal sort of full P&L responsibility, and when you're reporting on performance, what are the key metrics that you're looking at?
So there's a range. So again, when you get into the bigger brands, and bigger even budgets for research and tracking, you can kind of go quite deep. But a range of the kind of similar to what you talked about in terms of awareness and kind of brand health statements. We probably would have at times went even deeper, because if I had worked, when I was working on FMCG, we'd have been able to track consideration, you know, so you'd be able to track, okay, are you going to consider buying me? You've been able to track actual purchase, how frequently are you purchasing, how much are you purchasing, and then you can start to do some real modelling in terms of kind of potential future demand. So if we increase this by this, actually we could sell this amount more in the year. So those are metrics that actually sales guys like and the finance guys like, and ultimately there's a degree of discrepancy there, you know, but if it's broadly kind of an industry standard, then you've got some raw data to work with. So, you know, that would have been another key measure would have been salience. So salience is really about kind of how top of mind are you, and so that would have been definitely a metric that would have used alongside our competitors. So we always tracked alongside, particularly when I worked in the drinks industry, it was like dog eat dog. So you were, you know, absolutely tracking every point, and then the ultimate metric was market share. So the market share was the kind of the hard data. Okay, so what, because you're looking at a cake, so otherwise you're sometimes brand data, it's kind of in a vacuum. Whereas if you look at market share,
Yeah.
there's a cake here.
Yeah.
What part of the cake have I
Yeah,
got?
so if you've grown your sales 10%, but the market's grown 20, you're going
Well,
backwards.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's vanity and sanity and all of that. So very much we'd have looked at volume share and value share. So again, you could have brilliant volume share, but you could be giving your shirt away. So it's all about value share and making sure you're maintaining your price while you're growing that. So some of the metrics, like we would have had maybe the research company coming in and presenting that to us monthly, and we hung off every word because literally that was telling us, because you might have set a target internally, but then you don't know what's happening in the external world. So those external data reads of performance against your competitors was very insightful. So when you not every category has that, unfortunately, so when you have that, then you've got real kind of, or for example, we just pulled back and our spend by 20%, and these guys increased by 20%. They've jumped ahead by 10 percentage points. So actually there's an argument for kind of investing. And so some of those kind of metrics are good as well.
Okay. What's your take on getting the grips with the whole idea of the lifetime value of the customer then?
Well, like for me, I haven't, to be honest, done an awful lot on that. The reason being is that a lot of the FMCG work that I did would have been working via the retailers. Okay, so you wouldn't have actually got their direct data.
Okay,
so the best metric for customer lifetime value would have been some of the brand metrics. So using an independent panel like Kantar data or IRI data, you'd have been able to see, okay, so how frequently are somebody purchasing, how many times in a year, what's the penetration of the market, is the penetration of the market going down? And that would have been the closest. It's something that I think
there's so many moving parts in it, I think, aren't there?
And there's a lot of calculations.
Like, what is the lifetime of a customer? I mean, you have to, because you have to limit it in some way, don't you? You have to say, well, how long are we going to say we're going to look at this for? I mean, I first talked about this when I was in CDE, and the company like CDE, problem we have is you sell that big industrial machinery and it lasts for 25 years.
Yeah.
Right. So apart from some spares revenue and some after sales revenue that you might get, it's largely what you sold.
That one item,
That's it.
But I think it's like, if you think about direct to consumer, like it's obviously incredibly valuable there. In that space of direct to consumer.
Well, I mean, that's the subscription based razor brands are a great thing. How long do people stay subscribed for? But they obviously have to have been around for a while first. But if the average customer spends £10 a month and is a customer for 2.5 years, it's after a while you start to be able to figure out what the lifetime value of that customer is, which allows you then to figure out how much is it worth spending to acquire
cost
that
per
customer.
acquisition. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in B2B and direct to consumer, that's absolute critical measurement, and you've got the data to do that with assumptions.
Yeah.
It's
and
not,
a lot of
it's
the
not
time in my experience
science.
of dealing with I'm surprised actually that more finance people in my own experience haven't been as keen to get to that as I have. And I've just felt that they think it's just a mechanism for you trying to get more budget off me. Because if you're saying, we can spend more to acquire a customer because they're not just worth that one sale, they're worth 20.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I know what's coming next. Can I have some more money?
and then they'll always say, you're going to give it back to me then if you don't get that, and it's like, sorry, it's already spent. So there's a bit of a, because it's not an exact science, that's where the finance guys don't.
I think a lot, I had an email from a guy I knew earlier today asking me, did I know anybody who could give him a few pointers on how to get to the number, because they were struggling to even find someone who could do it for them. So I think it is a bit of a holy grail sort of. I
think some sectors have really pinned it down. Yeah. If you've got direct data, I think it's fairly a fairly straight line. You can figure it out. I think if there's indirect routes to market, then it becomes more difficult. But I do kind of rounding that off, getting better at data and getting better data inputs. Ultimately, we all need to get there, whatever your sector is.
And that's probably the issue with it, actually, that we don't have access to the data, B, don't know how to read it, or it's just kind of going, it's too complicated, so we won't deal with it. And that is the issue.
I think you've hit it there. I think a lot of the issue arises that you don't actually have the foundations of it. People might have an idea that they want to know what it is, but whenever you say to them, all right, okay, so what's your average order value? How often do people buy off you? all those. What's the repeat purchase percentage of your existing customers? I don't know.
And
okay, well, you need to go and find all of that out first, and then we might be able to work it out.
But then it's the action as well that comes after that, because the worst thing that you can do for me is go and get all of that data and go, oh, aren't we great? We can work out the lifetime value of a customer. So what?
So what?
So are you going to optimize? Can we do X, Y, and Z, or what? What does that teach us about your customer? What does that teach us about how they purchase and kind of things like that? And I think that it's great having these numbers, but we can have too many numbers that actually you start to get clouded. And I think it's Kirk Williams, now he's a PPC guy, but he says basically that there's so many metrics that you can gather all this data that you actually then end up not getting any insight from it because it's too much. You're in kind of info obesity. Yeah. That is paraphrasing it. But I do think that you can become blinded by the data, and each data point, if it's not put in context, can actually give an incorrect story. So for example, like, let's take bounce rate. Oh, if you have a really high bounce rate, oh, that means people don't like your site, or it's not really good. Doesn't well, actually, really. No, it doesn't. Yeah. But if you look at that as a standalone metric, and I think the same is some of these brand metrics that we're trying to get, just because, oh, they'll look good. It's a really fancy formula.
But it's looking at like, what's the biggest levers, which, and like, so I think sometimes kind of the massive rise of short-term performance and ever look at the full picture. Yeah. No. So I think, performance market inspections are brilliant at attribution, but at only part of the funnel. The bits that we can't really measure are just left. Yeah. So we kind of put attribution besides the bit that can be measured, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Beside digital.
That's why TV doesn't work.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. So I just think there's that whole.
Don't you start ranting about the TV doesn't work thing now, right?
But I think it's looking at kind of a holistic view of it and kind of standing back and kind of saying, well, can we apply the same analysis for the other kind of touch points in the customer journey, But in reality, a lot of the best performing companies are not paralyzed by data. They're agile and they're responding by kind of feedback and actually live market kind of tests.
You mentioned the customer experience there, and it leads us on. Nice segue into the next question. I was at the SaaS Stock event in Dublin a few weeks ago, and the two ladies from Forget the Funnel, Claire and Gio, I think, were doing a presentation. No, it wasn't. It was actually the late Jen Agartia, who's the CEO of Go Nimbly in the States. She was doing a presentation on how to improve your customer experience, and she was talking about peak end theory, and she didn't do it in a very theoretical way. She was highlighting the experience of you go to Disneyland, and there's several parts of that experience are pretty rubbish. Standing in a queue, having to remortgage your house to buy your lunch, standing in the swelter and Florida heat at 1 o'clock with screaming kids. None of this sounds very nice, right? But there's peaks, like going on Big Thunder Mountain, leaving when the kids have got their Mickey Mouse ears all at the end of the day, And if you took the average of all of those parts of the experience and scored it, the average experience, customers should score going to Disneyland a 5 or 6, but no one does, right? It's an 8 or 9 every time. And the reason is that the shit bits don't actually matter. It's the peaks and how you finish that are the important bits. They're the bits that people actually remember, because humans are idiots.
We're emotionally
and we're unpredictable and we're irrational, and we'll forget about the 42 degree heat with the screaming kids because didn't they look cute when they had the Mickey Mouse ears on when they were leaving?
We're making memories.
You're
just forgetting part of the memories.
That is exactly what Jen said. That's why that gets that score. So whenever you're looking at brand management, it's surely an integral part of that is that, okay, let's go from the start of the process through to a customer checks out from the website or leaves Disneyland or whatever that end point is, and work out how we can make that better. Yeah. And sometimes that's a scary thought because people think we have to make every point on that journey better. Well, the one thing that Jen said was find your 7s and turn them into 9s.
Yeah, exceptional. Yeah,
and forget about the rest, because you're only going to make something that's shit a little bit less shit. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Whereas if you find the 7s and turn it into 9s, what'll happen is that really accelerates the customer experience for you and will improve brand perception and brand value and all of that stuff. Can you tell, I mean, is that something that you've done, that whole customer experience stuff as part of the jobs you've worked on?
I think I just think that's so important, and I kind of always carried it through my career as how can you even when we're standing back and looking at a whole campaign or a whole year's, are we surprising and delighting? And for me, that has always been something I have kind of, as a stress test to what we're doing. Are we surprising? Are we delighting people, so that they're going to go away and talk about their great experience? And I suppose one example of that is that I kind of created the Tenants Vital music experience. Okay, so again, one of those ones where you had to kind of convince a board of this kind of vision that you had to turn a brand around, and that was Tenants, and the vehicle that I used for that was Tenants Vital. But I remember that kind of obviously the experience of that, there were some terrible experiences standing in bar queues that you knew that no matter how brilliantly that you organised the bar, we're going to be
standing.
Yeah. So we mapped out the whole experience of that festival in terms of, shining light, back well on Tenants was very well mapped out. And one of
unfortunately, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but unfortunately, one of the bad experiences is the bar sold Tenants.
I don't work there anymore, so but it's like you've got Tenants or Harp, neither of them are particularly going to set the world on fire. But there is again massive kind of brand loyalty to those. But Tenants was a brand in massive decline, hadn't been invested in, and so I decided to go all in on a music strategy and brought back Tenants Vital. But it was all about bringing about Tenants bringing experiences that are unforgettable to you. So some of the things that we did, again, we had big hype about the announcement of the bands. I remember literally doing a countdown clock before social was even social. We were doing this countdown clock, and you had to come on live for the kind of band reveal. And the first one that we did was Eminem, and I just remember just everything about that was so exciting. So it was palpable. Were you there when it was revealed? I think our social count went from 10,000 up to 80,000 on that day. But things that we did were you could win a chance to get a seat at the bar for 15 minutes, and actually when you're in the pouring rain and you can't get a seat is a priceless thing.
I would literally pay for that.
And then on the way out we did again a kind of ahead of its time, because it's obviously years ago now, we did kind of geo-targeting kind of mobile messages, so that when they were leaving they got a little mobile message to say thank you for being part of this. A little video that the guys actually edited live on site, so that they literally had the video that just was just everything that they just experienced that they could share with their friends, and then a wee voucher to have a Tenants, for some people that was amazing. But again, it was just hitting them when they were this was the best night, and making sure you were part of that moment. Really for me, that can be, because you need to get those things that are very memorable into
and
a brand
the fact
experience.
that the finish being important, that emotional bit of I just experienced that from the video.
And we could have just let we had the video team on site, because we said actually the next day doesn't matter. The next day they're hungover. The next day they're oh my god, at that moment it was everything. So hit them then when the emotion was high. So just kind of understanding what matters to them at different points.
And I'm sure that experience, but from what you said earlier, Jim, is an important part of that rebrand project. About what is it that we do that people like, and what is it that we do that people don't, and can we do more of the stuff?
So for us, it's a wee bit different in terms of at the end of the process you get a house, so we can't really compete with that. That's pretty good. So we can't really compete with that. Maybe saying that would pay your mortgage off or something, do something silly like that. That would be a wee bit better.
But you facilitated that dream, in terms that might never have actually happened.
Yeah, so I think for us, before the rebrand happened, basically the ownership application and the process was very manual. That you had to fill in a 40-page application form, and I had to fill it in because I actually went through ownership. Then you had to do what was an interview. And the interview was actually a chat. And when I came along to do my interview, me and my husband came down, I made him wear a suit, and he was just what am I saying? What's happening if I say something wrong and we don't get the house? The stress levels, and it was literally do you understand what it is? Blah 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 blah. And it was just
the wording.
It was just a chat. So it was the wording. So it was the wording in the process that people then were just is it really worth it to get a house with ownership, because you have to go through all of this, and people kind of go, no, they're hard to deal with and things like that. So we completely changed that, and we went digital, because banks were going digital, everyone was digital first. So we changed our process, and we actually split our process up, because one of the issues that we found was that you had to prior to all of this happening, you normally had to sale agree a house, then you had to apply for ownership, because we needed to do everything at once, because we thought, get it through, that'd be more efficient. But for the customer, it wasn't that great, because you were selling agreeing a house going, I don't know if I'm going to get a mortgage. Like this is really bad for us. So we actually went, we have to split the process. And that's where sometimes, we sometimes make our processes that little bit longer, so that people understand what they're getting themselves into, and that it works in the context of our environment. And I think that for us that was really important, because if you look at our Trustpilot now, it'll say buying a house was really stressful. We can never do anything about that, because there's so many different parts, but ownership were there to help us. Ownership's process was easy. They, again, full transparency. So we have a portal that people can log in and kind of go, oh, where's my house? Where's the purchase at? Oh, it's with the solicitor, because what had happened before that, and if you've ever bought a house, everyone blames everything on the solicitor. They're oh, everything's with the solicitor.
It is usually their fault.
But then the solicitor blames everyone else, and you're kind of going, okay. So again, transparency for us, and just kind of giving them the control of that entire process, because processes are one of the most important things in marketing, in my opinion, but they're one of the things that are never really looked at and going, oh yeah, we'll figure that out. And you're kind of going, no, we need to figure that out before we even go into market or think about anything else. We need to think about actually, how do we walk the customer through that? Yeah. And so for us, a lot of the time actually was the very start of the process. So we have to make it, that it's understandable, that it's easy to kind of start it and get on, and then it's easy for other parties to work together. So that was ours.
I'm conscious of time. I do remember beforehand, actually, you said I don't think we can make this last an hour, so we've actually run 15 minutes over here. So, so we're going to skip because I'm conscious of time. Yeah. Wrapping up then, from the conversations that we've had, it's pretty clear that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts in the brand management process. From both of your experience of doing the job, what's your favourite part of it, and why? If we start with you, Ashton.
I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a bit of a control freak, but I do like the ownership of it. I like the idea of being there kind of from the A to the Z in terms of creating the strategy and then kind of the implementation, all the activity. I think it's a really interesting job. I think you get you become a very rounded kind of potential leader when you do a brand management course, and you can take that into running your own business, or kind of to be like a marketing director, brand director. Yeah. So I love that side of it. I think a career in brand management can take you anywhere. When I came through the CAM degree in Jordanstown, and kind of just fell into brand management because of my first job. But I think it takes you more places, a career in brand management potentially. So big advocate.
I think it's the evolution. Marketing in general never stays the same, and it's not like, oh, we've done marketing and that's it over. Branding, because it's based on people and human interaction, is always going to be changing, and you're always going to be optimizing it, and you're always going to be going, actually, what do we need to turn down and what do we need to turn up? So I like that, you can see the progress, and you can kind of go, actually, well, this is where we need to go, this is what we need to do, and then you put that feedback loop in, you're like, okay, this is what we need to optimize, this is what we need to go away with. So I think that it's not just, oh, every day is the same, or every quarter is the same. There's something always to look at. So I think that that's kind of good.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we'll call that a wrap now, and hopefully people stuck with us and haven't missed their bus or train home. So thanks very much to everybody who joined us tonight. Our next webinar is on the 24th of November, where we're talking about is consumer behaviour changing. We're going to look at, obviously, the big push to online during COVID, and now that we're out of COVID again, just what the legacy of that has been and how that's changed, how consumers are behaving. We've also got 2 on-tour episodes that will be coming out at some stage over the next while, where we were in Manchester last week pre-recording those. So we spoke to Dan Kelsall. Anybody who follows Dan on LinkedIn will know he's got plenty to say for himself. And the other one was Nick Entwistle, who runs 1 Minute Briefs on Twitter. For anybody who's not familiar with it, I would suggest you give it a look, because it's very, very good and very entertaining. So thanks again for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll